Hello, my name is Troy McCormack, and today I'm going to be talking about the smooth muscles, how they work molecularly, and a couple of interesting conditions that can happen with the smooth muscles. Here are a few examples of the types of muscles in the human body. We are going to be focused on part C here, which is the smooth muscle. However, a good basic histological diagram of the different types of muscles allow for a better understanding of the differences and similarities in these muscle tissue types. So here we have the skeletal muscle. This is what goes on in our biceps or our fingers, our expressions. Um, these muscles are every single muscle type has a nuclei. So we can see the nuclei here. Here we can see the nucleus in the cardiac muscle, and here we can see the nuclei in the smooth muscle. So muscles all have a nuclei, and they're all made up of these fibers, myosin and actin. And they all work in a little bit different way, but mainly we're going to be focusing on the smooth muscle types. Smooth muscles make up a large part of the human body in places that are unseen mainly. Here is a microscopic slide of smooth muscle that shows that the nucleus of the muscle in blue and the muscle fibers in pink. It is easy to see how even on the microscopic levels why these muscles are called smooth. They're very smooth, and you can see that the lines here are very smooth. Myosin and actin in these muscles is arranged diagonally. We're going to get into that just a little bit here. They contain caveolae, which are deposits of calcium, and a general lack of sarcoplasmic reticulum. Most of the calcium comes from the extracellular fluid that surrounds these smooth muscles. Smooth muscles can be activated in a couple different ways. This diagram here shows how some of these smooth muscles could work. Um, on the left-hand side here, we have a multi-unit smooth muscle system, which doesn't have, they're not connected here. Whereas on the single unit, they are connected here. And so um, one of the ways smooth muscles works is through this nerve here, this autonomic or intrinsic nerve. And what happens is along this nerve, there are portions called varicosity or varicosities, and these contain the neurotransmitters. So what happens here is the varicosity releases its neurotransmitter into receptor sites into the smooth muscles, which causes calcium to go up and a response, which oftentimes is a contraction or a relaxation of the muscle. Additionally, there is a capillary system, or the vessel system, which is also made of smooth muscle, that allows for the circulation of hormones through diffusion into these smooth muscle receptor sites, like here and here. So we can see here that smooth muscles can be operated by not just the nervous system, like which is here, but also from um, hormones circulating through the blood system. The main difference between a multi-unit and a single unit is the gap junction, which is right here. And that allows for a cascade of things to kind of happen along the smooth muscle, which is like a contraction, or peristalsis maybe in the intestine. Whereas other smooth muscles where might just be want to activating that one certain uh, cell at a time. So here we see a more three-dimensional, or a drawing of how these varicosities are anatomically correlated or physiologically correlated with these muscle fibers. So here we have a close-up of the varicosity, and you can see the vesicles that contain the neurotransmitters, which are these little purple guys here, right here. And they will be released directly into those little fibers of the muscles. Now you can see these nerves, they innervate the whole muscle right here. It kind of goes around in this seemingly random spider web type configuration. And um, what's interesting about these varicosities is they contain mitochondria, so they're able to um, you know process power of the cell, ATP, and produce ATP, because they need to work quite often. Other hormones that affect smooth muscles are, um, you know, rather than the nervous system, but some of the hormones that affect the smooth muscles are norepinephrine, epinephrine, acetylcholine, angiotensin, endothelin, vasopressin, oxytocin, which is important for the contraction of the smooth muscle in the uterus for a woman after childbirth, serotonin, and histamine. And there's also two types of hormone-gated aspects of the smooth cell, which are excitatory and inhibitory receptors. So these receptors can work in both ways, as either hormones can stop it or they can start it in the smooth muscles. So one aspect of these varicosities is that they are autonomic nerve fibers, um, and those vesicles full of neurotransmitters and a few mitochondria, as I mentioned before. Um, the neurotransmitter is different in the sympathetic, which is muscle groups that like the skeletal or um, you know, and those use a norepinephrine, whereas the parasympathetic use a acetylcholine type. The receptor sites for the neurotransmitters are throughout the smooth muscle, and there is no motor end plate like in other muscle types. So let's get into the thick and thin of the smooth muscles and how they work. So we have these dense bodies all throughout the muscle fiber. Here's the nuclei here. And these dense bodies, such as here, they are in kind of this lattice around the muscle cell, and they kind of form in this diagonal, um, you know, diagonal way here. And so as they contract, it kind of makes it almost look like a crenation, almost as if you think of a cell as it you know shrinks, and so it pulls it together. You can see these thin filaments get closer to the thick filaments, and they bring it closer together. And that's how these smooth muscles contract. These dense bodies hold together the thick are the thick filaments, and the thin filaments are the other aspect of the cell. So as stated before, the muscle itself can be controlled by both electric signals, action potentials, and chemical signals or hormones, and as such may be divided into two subtypes. These are the single unit smooth muscle composed of electronically coupled cells, where triggering contraction in one cell will induce contraction in all linked cells, and multi-unit cell muscle composed of non-linked cells, so contraction can be triggered in one cell without causing stimulation in neighboring cells. And that's where those gap junctions come into play. Smooth muscle is composed of many contractile muscle cells with a single centrally located nucleus, which is here. These cells contain active and myosin filaments arranged in bundles as opposed to bands, meaning they differ from skeletal muscles by the fact that they have no striations or sarcomeres. Although the basic unit of contraction in these two types of muscle fibers, smooth muscle and skeletal muscle, are similar, smooth muscle lacks Z-lines and are instead fixated in position by structures known as dense bodies. The contraction of smooth muscles tend to be slower but more prolonged than that of skeletal muscles, which is why they require the mitochondria. So this slide here is from a recent study in 2016 that talks about how um, smooth muscles relate to um, the formation of atherosclerosis, which is um, the buildup of plaque in the body. So here we can see the loss of a myocardium, which is the smooth muscle cells. So in this study, they found that as these cells break down and come off the come away from the smooth muscle, they start breaking up and they form all these different constituents here. Um, and macrophages, break them down into these foam cells. We have, um, these, they end up going up here into the extracellular matrix, and it's right here on these endothelial cells. So they kind of break up, and then they'll go and they'll move into these sites here, where they will begin to cause this bubble, which is characteristic of atherosclerosis. And because this is happening in the arteries of people, it's very dangerous for things like heart attacks. These our blood vessels are made up of smooth muscle, and so um, this is an interesting way to look at how heart disease starts. So understanding exactly how these smooth muscle cells work is very important because there's you know a life cycle for these cells. And what happens is in the breakdown of the smooth muscles, it leads to the accumulation of this plaque here. And this is what's, they say, oh, you got, butter in your veins, butter in your arteries, and it's clogging up your heart. This is what they're talking about. And this accumulation of plaque, which causes the atherosclerosis. I'm probably saying that wrong, um, well, anyways, the understanding of this will lead to new treatment options for this very dangerous and deadly disease, because as you can see here, the endothelial cells, they start breaking open, and the components of plaque and all the things that kind of have formed in here, um, they cause this thing called the necrotic core, and it creates this little bubble in the side of the wall of an artery. Um, when our cells die, smooth muscle cells, when they die, they create this issue. And finding out how to stop it, right here at the senescence of it, or during the apoptosis, and stopping these foam cells, or even changing the way these death receptor ligands or macrophages work, um, can really help in fighting this condition. Lastly, I want to talk about another smooth muscle problem that can occur. That's occurs in about 1 in 7,000 children born. Is a condition known as Hirschsprung's disease, and this is a pretty bad one here. Um, what happens is there's none of the nerves in um, the colon, and the distal part of the colon here is just not doesn't have any nerves, so it's not able to produce normal peristalsis, which doesn't allow for fecal matter to go out through the normal, which would be over here, normal route. And so it gets backed up here, and it causes this enlarged colon, which is very dangerous because it can burst, and it can burst here and then cause some really bad abdominal um, things, necrotic bowels, those kind of things. So it's important to kind of figure out how this works. Well, um, what's going on is, there's some sort of genetic quotient to it, but mainly what I was thinking about when I saw this was perhaps putting some sort of pacemaker, because currently what they do is they'll chop it here and chop it here and take the good part here and attach it to this part here. But if maybe you were to say make some sort of like mesh pacemaker that could cause peristalsis, that could surround here using laparoscopic surgery, maybe this this type of surgery wouldn't have to be done. So, well, that's it for my presentation. Here are my references. Thank you. Have a great day.